Hello, and thanks for tuning in to the first episode of In the Hub, a podcast brought to you by Theovision International. I am your host, Mame Oforiwa Sintim. Our first topic for the podcast series is going to be on leadership in a crisis, or leadership in crisis. And I have here with us the president and founder of Theovision International, Reverend Theodore Mensa Asare. Reverend Asare, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, by God's grace.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us on our first podcast series.
Thank you for having me.
As mentioned, the topic for today is leadership in a crisis. Currently, we are going through a pandemic all over the world. A lot of people have been affected. Leaders have been put in very critical positions. And today we want to look at how to become a leader or how to lead your people when you're in such a crisis such as this global pandemic. Before we dive into the topic, who is a leader and what is leadership?
A leader is someone who is influencing others.
Okay.
John Maxwell put it that way. Leadership is influence.
Okay.
So all of us are leaders. A father is a leader, a mother is a leader.
Right.
With your siblings, workplace, we are all playing some kind of leadership role. So a leader is somebody who is leading for someone to follow. Okay. And I think Maxwell also said the same thing, that if no one is following you, then you are just taking a walk. You are not leading.
Right.
So you must have people you influence.
Okay. So how can crisis redefine leadership?
Crisis really redefine leadership because it disrupts everything, and a leader must think ahead to see how he will go through with his people in the crisis,
yes,
to deal with situations, solve problems, and then put the hearts of the followers in peace. So crisis is something that brings a leader out. When crisis comes, we see who you are. We see who the leader is. So even though we don't pray for crisis, it has opportunities that brings out when you have a good leader leading in crisis.
Okay. So what then are some of the characteristics of a good leader?
A good leader in crisis is someone who assesses the situation and think ahead of his people and begin to plan with his team how to lead in all this. So a leader in a situation like this thinks about the people more than the situation, so that the people will be at safe, the people will build some trust, the people will know where they are going, so that the leader provides direction for that to happen.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that the leader looks at the people and tries to, plan for the people. So what then are some of the key things to look at during a crisis as a leader?
I read some few articles that maybe I can quote some of them from Dan Sullivan. He's a coach. And he says, during crisis like this, the leader must forget about himself and focus on others. And also, we tend to be so concerned about the commodity, the product we are carrying, and then we try to forget about building relationship.
Right.
But building relationship, it's so important, so that our focus should not be so much on the product, the commodity, the sales, but building relationship and bringing safety to the people, either the staff or donors or followers.
Or even your family, as you had mentioned.
Even your family, right.
Okay. So how then does a leader plan for a crisis? Is there a magic blueprint that helps a leader plan for a crisis? Or
I don't think there's a magic thing that comes up and say 1, 2, 3, go. Yeah, then you are going. No, but you have to look. You work with your team,
right?
Okay, and then you look at the situation. You need to understand the situation very well and see how you can put your team together and think about what you can do best. In other words, crisis like this, we are thinking about money to pay workers, money to do production, money, but some of these crises are going to take some of the things we take for granted away. At the end of it, the normal we are going to see is not going to be the normal we know. It will be a different normal. And so in this crisis, we build values that will help us stand for a long time, go through the crisis. Because crises have come and gone.
Right.
There have been several crises. If you look at the history, several crises have come and gone.
Right.
And so this one will come and go. But then how we go through it is something that we need to prepare ourselves to build values that will last.
I like the fact that you mentioned that several crises have come and gone. Theovision International is 30 years. That means it has gone through its fair share of some of these crises. How has leading Theovision or being the president and the founder of Theovision been like in some of these critical times?
Yeah, we've gone through several crises. Some were very difficult. I think 2011, we have to even cut our staff more than half.
That was around the recession.
The recession,
yes, the
that's
global
right.
Recession.
Funding was a big problem. But in all this, you also depend on God and planning.
Right.
You depend on God and planning. And God saw us through the whole time and brought us back to our feet. And so I strongly believe that this one, we will pass through it, and by His grace, we will stand on our feet in victory.
Amen. Amen. You mentioned God and planning. In a crisis such as this COVID-19, how do Christian leaders respond to such a crisis? How do they lead their people? How do they give their people the assurance that everything is going to be all right?
And it will be God's word. God's word, everything is in the word. Some of these crises, you read Psalms. David went through some and put them down for us to read. And God also has spoken in His word several times that He will never leave us nor forsake us. And because of that, we can also say that God is our helper. God is our leader. And so His word must be closer to us as leaders, Christian leaders, and also seek His presence. But not only that, planning and working with your team to put things in perspective. It's very, very important, because you can pray and pray and pray, but you must get up and go and do something. And so all these are very important to put together, prayer and planning.
Okay. My key takeaway from all that you said is that throughout your mention of being a leader, leadership, you always talked about working with your team. So that means you can't be a leader without your team.
Correct.
Very, very important. I think that would be my personal key takeaway from what you've said.
Because the team plays a major role in moving the organization forward. And so working with the team brings out some of the things you are not seeing. And the team will help you see that. So you work together to achieve your goal.
Okay. Can you give us some biblical leaders and how they reacted in times of crisis?
The first person will be Jesus.
Okay.
Jesus was such a great leader that his ministry lasted 3 years. And we are still seeing the repercussions and what is happening all over the world. He led well. He is one CEO that you can't compare to anybody. And he taught in the Bible also how we can also lead. So Jesus will be the first person. The second person I would like to quote is David.
Okay.
When you look at 1 Samuel chapter 30, David and his men went out. When they came, their place had been ransacked. Their wives and children have been taken captive. And men of war started crying. The Bible said they cried until they have no more strength to cry. And after crying, they wanted to kill David, who was their leader. That why have you let this happen to us? But a good leader, as the Bible says, David encouraged himself in the Lord. After encouraging himself, he sought the presence of God, and God gave him the direction. So that shows how a leader should behave in crisis, because in crisis, they are all in it.
Right.
We are all in the crisis, but you have to stand up and then lead your people in such a way that it will bring some solution. So David is also one example that we can use as a Christian leader.
Thanks for being our first guest on our new podcast series, In the Hub.
I am praying that this program or podcast will be a success to many. Amen. That will help many as many people comes on to share their wisdom and their thinking.
Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Join us again next week for another episode of In the Hub, and we will be talking to a missionary here at Theo Vision International. Stay blessed, and thanks for tuning in.